Why had the square fallen so utterly silent over a single step? No one knew why the Queen's guard had shifted, why his polished boots scraped half an inch across the cobblestones, why his gloved hand twitched just slightly at the side of his rifle. But in that breathless second, the chattering crowd froze. 1,000 eyes locked on one figure in the scarlet tunic and bearskin cap. And behind that stillness stood her, Captain Eliza Hart. Most of the tourists who had gathered at the palace gates that chilly London morning had no idea she was even there. They saw uniforms, weapons, and ceremony, but they didn't see the woman hidden just beyond the shadow of the archway, her heartbeat steady and low, her finger grazing the trigger guard of a weapon no one would ever notice. To them, the guard was a spectacle, to her it was cover. It wasn't supposed to happen here, not on a day like this, not during a parade, but the whispers that had reached MI7 3 nights ago spoke of a plan, a hidden hand among the crowd, a message to be delivered in the form of blood. And Eliza, she had sworn it wouldn't happen on her watch. She shifted her stance slightly, her eyes scanning the shifting sea of faces beyond the iron railings. A father lifting his daughter onto his shoulders, a woman clutching her phone, smiling as she filmed the changing of the guard, a couple laughing, oblivious to the cold wind that whipped through the plaza. They were ordinary, they were innocent, and somewhere among them was a ghost. Eagle 1 status. The voice crackled softly in her earpiece. She didn't move, her lips barely parted as she replied. Eyes open, nothing yet. She hated operations like this, the kind where the danger didn't wear a uniform, where it smiled, where it could stand 2 feet away from you and you'd never even know until it was too late. Her hand brushed the thin scar on her jaw, a faint, silvery reminder of the last time she'd underestimated someone in a crowd. That mistake had cost 3 lives. It was the reason she'd been pulled out of field duty for almost a year. It was also the reason she was here now. The guard shifted again. The movement was so precise, so rehearsed, that most people didn't even notice the subtle break in pattern. But Eliza did. It wasn't part of the drill. It was a signal, one she had arranged days before. Crowd compression, row 3, 11 o'clock. Her voice remained calm, almost bored, but inside adrenaline hummed like a wire pulled tight. She swept her gaze toward the indicated sector, counting faces. Black beanie, green jacket, gray scarf, and then her breath caught. There. A man, early 30s, shoulders hunched slightly beneath a tourist's backpack, but it was his hands that gave him away. They never left his pockets, not once, not even as the crowd cheered and shuffled around him. Her heart began to thud. Target visual, she murmured, possible concealment. Confirm. Not yet, wait. She hated this part, the waiting, the watching. Every instinct screamed to move, to act, to eliminate the possibility before it became reality. But she couldn't, not without proof, not here where one wrong decision could ignite chaos. And besides, there was something else, something off. The man's eyes weren't scanning for security. They weren't darting nervously. They were fixed, unwavering, on a single spot beyond the fence. And when Eliza followed his gaze, her stomach tightened. The Queen's carriage was 5 minutes away. It wasn't always like this for her. Once, long before the scars and the sleepless nights, Eliza Hart had been the rising star of the Royal Air Force. A pilot, a tactician, a natural leader. She'd been 23 when she first took command of a special operations flight, and 26 when a mission gone wrong left half her team dead in the mountains of Kandahar. She hadn't pulled the trigger that day, she hadn't even been on the ground, but the decisions had been hers, the orders, the timing, the route. And when the ambush came, their screams still echoed in her mind long after the dust had settled. She promised herself she'd never freeze again, never doubt, never hesitate. Yet here she was, heart hammering, every second ticking louder than the last. Carriage en route, 3 minutes, the voice in her ear announced. She swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving the man in the beanie. His posture shifted, subtle but enough. Her pulse spiked. Control, this is Eagle 1, possible hostile intent confirmed, requesting green light. Negative, crowd density too high, hold position. Hold. The word burned in her chest like fire. She could already see how it would play out, the hesitation, the cost. She'd seen it before, and she knew she wouldn't live with it again. The first drum roll echoed across the plaza. The ceremonial band had begun its slow march toward the gates. The crowd pressed forward, phones rising like a field of metallic stars. And the man moved. Not fast, not enough to draw attention, but enough. He shifted 1 step closer to the barrier, his fingers twitched, the weight in his jacket pocket shifted. Eliza didn't think, she acted. Her hand flashed to the mic on her collar. All units lock Sector Charlie. 2 figures moved instantly, plainclothes operators who had been blending among the tourists snapped into motion, converging on the target from both sides. The man froze, then tried to push forward. Hands where I can see them, one officer barked. And in that frozen heartbeat, that razor-thin edge between life and death, he hesitated. A mistake. They surged, he was tackled hard against the barrier, hands wrenched free, and from his right pocket a small black device clattered to the ground. It wasn't a gun, it wasn't a bomb. It was a transmitter, one powerful enough to disrupt encrypted signals. Enough to blind the palace's defenses, enough to let someone else slip through unnoticed. Secondary, Eliza hissed. Where's the secondary? Scanning negative. Her gut said otherwise. There was always a secondary, always a plan beneath the plan. And as the carriage turned the final corner, its polished frame glinting in the autumn light, she knew this wasn't over. Then she saw it, a glint, just for a second, high above on the rooftop of a building overlooking the square. A reflection, a scope. Her blood ran cold. Sniper West Roof, 2 o'clock, move now. But they were out of time. The guard who had shifted earlier, the one whose subtle motion had silenced the crowd, suddenly stepped forward, his rifle snapping upward, not in salute but in aim. The crowd gasped, phones dropped, a woman screamed. And then silence. The shot rang out, a single thunderous crack that echoed against the stone walls. The figure on the rooftop jerked violently backward, their rifle clattering against the ledge before disappearing from sight. The guard lowered his weapon, he did not speak, he did not move again. And the square remained silent. Later, when the reports were written and the security briefings were filed, the official version would say the sniper had been neutralized before a shot was fired, that no lives had been lost, that the Queen's visit had continued uninterrupted. But Eliza knew the truth. The truth was that it had all come down to a single moment, a choice, a signal, a half-inch shift of a soldier's boot that had changed everything. And as she stood in the fading light, watching the crowd slowly return to their laughter and their photos and their ordinary lives, she felt a strange weight settle over her chest. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was something quieter, heavier. A reminder that dignity, real dignity, didn't need to shout. It didn't wear medals or crave recognition. Sometimes dignity didn't speak at all. It simply acted. Yet deep down, beneath the relief and the calm, Eliza felt a pulse of something else, a question that wouldn't let go. Who had sent the sniper? Why was the transmitter meant to blind their systems? And what message had they truly been trying to send? Because as much as the mission had ended, it hadn't. This was only the first move. And she knew with a sinking certainty that whoever had orchestrated today's attempt was still out there, watching, waiting. And the next time they wouldn't miss. The rain began 2 nights later. It came softly at first, a thin drizzle sliding over the slate rooftops and cobblestones of Westminster, but by the time the clock tower struck midnight, London was drowning in it. Streetlights bled gold across the wet pavement. Car tires hissed through shallow rivers, and somewhere deep beneath the city, Captain Eliza Hart stood staring at a wall of names. Each name belonged to someone who had died because of a decision she'd made. Some were teammates, others were strangers caught in the crossfire of operations gone wrong, and one was her sister. Her fingers hovered over that name, trembling slightly despite the cold air of the underground operations center. It was a ritual she never skipped before a mission, a small, silent apology to the ghost she carried with her. Captain Hart. The voice pulled her back. It belonged to Commander Bryce, head of the Royal Security Division. His presence was impossible to ignore, tall, sharp-featured, a man carved from granite and discipline. Briefing room 3, he said simply, it's time. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and tension. A half-dozen analysts sat hunched over laptops, their faces pale in the glow of the screens. Satellite images, intercepted messages, and blurry surveillance stills covered the digital display on the far wall. 48 hours since the attempted breach, Bryce began, packing slowly before the screen. We've confirmed the sniper was ex-military, Eastern Bloc. No official records, but his fingerprints trace back to a private contractor in the Balkans, one we've had eyes on before. Ghost cell, Eliza asked. Bryce nodded grimly. Ghost cell. The name hung in the air like a curse. Ghost cell was more myth than fact, a private network of mercenaries and ideologues for hire, responsible for assassinations and sabotage across half a dozen countries. They were ghosts in every sense, no flag, no cause, no trace left behind. And if they were involved here, it meant one thing: the transmitter had been only the beginning. Do we know the objective? One of the analysts asked. Not yet, Bryce replied, but we intercepted chatter about a second phase, something bigger. They're calling it Crownfall. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Crownfall, the word tasted wrong in Eliza's mouth. She'd heard Ghost Cell's code phrases before: iron dusk, black lantern, silent choir. They always meant something, always pointed to a deeper design. Whatever this is, Bryce continued, we have 72 hours before the next move, and we're blind. The sniper, the transmitter, the decoy, all part of something coordinated. He paused, his gaze found Eliza. That's why you're leading the next phase. She blinked at me. You've got eyes no one else has. You saw the pattern in the crowd before anyone else did, and frankly, he hesitated, the rarest crack in his composure. You're the only one I trust with this. Eliza said nothing. Trust was a heavy word in their world, heavier than loyalty, heavier than rank, and it had been a long time since anyone had used it in a sentence with her name. 3 hours later, she was airborne. The chopper roared low over the darkened countryside, its rotors slicing through the rain. Through the side window, she could see the Thames snaking silver beneath the clouds. London was shrinking behind her, and with it, the illusion of safety. Her team sat across from her, 4 operators she knew by call signs more than names. Stone, a demolitions expert with scars like map lines across his face. Wisp, a soft-spoken signals analyst who never looked anyone in the eye. Calder, the medic, calm as still water. And Ash, her second in command and the only one who had known her before Kandahar. You good? Ash asked quietly over the rotor noise. Define good. Breathing focused, not planning to jump out the back. She managed a faint smile, 2 out of 3. Their destination was an old textile mill in Manchester, long abandoned and now repurposed as a surveillance hub. Intelligence suggested Ghost Cell had used it as a dead drop site 2 weeks prior. If there were clues to Crownfall, they'd be there. The insertion was silent. A sweep team cleared the perimeter while Eliza and Ash breached the interior. The air inside was thick with mildew and dust, the ghosts of 100 forgotten years. Thermal's clean, Ash whispered, sweeping his rifle across the shadows. Move slow, Eliza replied. They've been here, might have left surprises. They moved methodically, clearing room by room, and then in what had once been a foreman's office they found it. A corkboard, old, water-stained, but pinned to it were fresh photographs. Surveillance photos of the Queen's motorcade, the palace gates, the guard rotation schedule. And at the center, Eliza's face. For a heartbeat, the room tilted. The air seemed to vanish from her lungs. They know who you are, Ash murmured. They shouldn't, her voice was steady, but inside a cold wave of dread was rising. Her identity was classified, buried beneath layers of clearance, if Ghost Cell had it. They're not just after the crown, Ash said quietly, they're after you. The discovery shifted everything. Back in London, analysts pored over the evidence. The photos, the targeting grids, the coded messages scrawled in Cyrillic across scraps of paper. One phrase appeared again and again: she will fall before the throne does. It wasn't just a plot, it was personal. And that terrified Eliza more than she'd ever admit. Because personal meant motive. Motive meant history, and there was only one person in Ghost Cell who had history with her. Kirill Vostov. A name she hadn't spoken aloud in 5 years. She had met him once in a snow-swept village near the Uzbek border. He'd been their informant, a Ghost Cell defector trading intelligence for asylum, and for a brief, dangerous moment she'd believed he was telling the truth. He was. His betrayal cost 3 agents their lives and left Eliza trapped behind enemy lines for 6 days. 6 days of cold, hunger, and silence. 6 days of wondering if anyone was coming for her. When she finally escaped, Kirill was gone. And now it seemed he was back. The next 48 hours were a blur of briefings, stakeouts, and sleepless nights. London's streets swarmed with plainclothes agents. Drones circled the skis. Every camera, every sensor, every satellite was turned toward finding Ghost Cell's next move. But they were ghosts for a reason. They left no trails, no chatter, no mistakes. Until they did. It was Calder who caught it, a single anomaly buried in a flood of intercepted communications. A coded purchase order routed through 3 shell companies. The item, a specialized EMP warhead. The delivery point, an abandoned rail yard outside Birmingham. EMP. The transmitter at the parade had been a test. This was the real play: disable communications, blind defenses, cut the palace off from the outside world, and in the chaos that followed, assassinate the crown. Window, Eliza asked. 36 hours. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The plan was simple: infiltrate the rail yard, intercept the device, neutralize Ghost Cell before they deployed it. Simple on paper, deadly in reality. The rail yard was a labyrinth of rusted train cars and crumbling warehouses, each one a perfect kill zone. It would be close quarters, dirty and fast, the kind of operation where one mistake meant body bags. And as Eliza checked her gear in the pre-dawn gloom, she felt the old ghost stirring. Kandahar, the names on the wall, her sister's last phone call. This was why she was here, why she had come back. Not for medals, not for redemption. For peace. They breached at 200. Wisp jammed external signals. Stone disabled the perimeter sensors. Ash and Calder secured the southern flank. Eliza led the main entry team through a narrow access tunnel beneath the old freight offices. It was silent inside, too silent. No guards, no patrols, no signs of recent activity. Something's wrong, Ash muttered. Eliza's instincts screamed agreement. Every hair on her neck stood on end, and then she saw it. A small, blinking red light on the far wall. Tripwire. Back, she hissed, Itzo. The explosion tore through the tunnel. The blast hurled her backward, slamming her into the cold concrete. Her ears rang, smoke filled her lungs. Somewhere nearby, someone was screaming. Stone's hit, Calder shouted, we need extraction. But extraction wasn't coming, not yet. Eliza forced herself to her feet, blood slick on her temple. The blast had been small, controlled, not meant to kill, meant to delay. Which meant, they know we're here, she whispered. And sure enough, the first gunfire erupted seconds later. Shadows moved among the train cars, ghost cell operatives, black-clad and disciplined. Bullets sparked against steel, the air filled with the staccato of automatic fire. Fall back, Ash yelled. Negative, Eliza roared over the noise. We hold the ground, that device does not leave this yard. The firefight was brutal, short distances, blinding muzzle flashes, the acrid stink of cordite and rain. Eliza moved like a ghost through the chaos, low, deliberate, each shot placed with surgical precision. But there were too many, and for every enemy that fell, two more emerged. Then through the smoke she saw him. Kirill, older now, harder but unmistakable. Their eyes met across the carnage, and in that instant the world seemed to narrow to a single, razor-sharp point. He smiled, and vanished into the shadows. When the shooting stopped, the yard was silent again, but the device was gone. They had failed. One man dead, two wounded, and the warhead now in enemy hands. As the extraction chopper lifted them into the rain-soaked night, Eliza stared down at the smoking wreckage below. The mission had been a trap, a message. Ghost Cell hadn't just beaten them. They had wanted her to see them win. Back at headquarters, Bryce's expression was carved from stone. They're going to deploy it, he said quietly, and when they do, we'll be blind, deaf, vulnerable. Eliza said nothing. She couldn't. Words felt useless, heavy. Captain, Bryce said softly, you did everything you could. No, she whispered, not yet. Because this wasn't over, it couldn't be. Not while Kirill was still out there, not while Crownfall loomed on the horizon. And not while the weight of every name on that wall still pressed against her heart. The city was awake, but it didn't know why. Across London, security cameras swiveled silently. Streets were cordoned without explanation. Transit schedules shifted without notice. And somewhere deep in the stone belly of a government building that didn't officially exist, Captain Eliza Hart stared into the void of a digital map pulsing red. 3 blinking signals. 3 possible detonation sites. In less than 24 hours before Ghost Cell made its move. Which one is it? Bryce asked behind her, his voice tight. Eliza didn't answer. She couldn't. All 3 targets were plausible. All 3 had vulnerabilities. Buckingham Palace, symbolic, high-profile but heavily guarded. Parliament, strategic, devastating but predictable. Or St. Aldwyn's Hospital, unexpected, civilian-heavy, and impossible to evacuate without tipping their hand. EMP range, she asked instead. 5 kilometers, enough to black out central London. 5 kilometers, that wasn't an attack, that was a message, a statement, a warning. Ghost Cell didn't want casualties, they wanted humiliation, and they wanted it to happen where the world was watching. Run the data again, she ordered. Wisp, hunched over a cluster of monitors, sighed. We've run it 17 times, Captain. The probabilities are within 2% of each other. It's a shell game. Then we stop guessing, she said. We make them show their hand. Ash leaned against the console, arms crossed. You're thinking bait. I'm thinking we leak a false schedule, Eliza said. A high-value movement, something irresistible. Bryce's brow furrowed, and if they don't take the bait? Then they're smarter than we think, she paused, but if they do? Then we take them out before they can blink, Ash finished. The bait was simple, a fabricated intel drop hinting at a last-minute visit from a foreign dignitary, someone important enough to warrant maximum security, but low enough profile to seem like a soft target. The convoy route led straight through an abandoned industrial district, an ideal ambush zone. If Ghost Cell bit, they'd strike there. If they didn't, they'd have to reveal their real plan. Either way, Eliza would be waiting. They set up before dawn. Cold rain washed over the cracked concrete as tactical units melted into shadows. Snipers took positions on skeletal rooftops. Surveillance drones hovered high above the clouds, invisible to the naked eye. Eliza crouched behind a rusted shipping container, the weight of her rifle comforting against her shoulder. The plan was sound, the trap was set. But still, something gnawed at her. "Talk to me," Ash murmured over comms. "It's too clean," she whispered, "and too quiet." "Maybe they're not coming." "No," she said, shaking her head. "They're here, I can feel it." Hours crawled by. The decoy convoy rolled into position. Nothing, no movement, no signal interference, no hint of an ambush. And then, thermal ping, Sector Bravo, 3 hostiles moving fast. Her heart jumped. Eyes on. Negative, they're splitting up, 2 north, 1 south. South's a feint, Eliza said instantly. Main teams north, intercept now. Teams surged into motion. But as Eliza and Ash rounded the northern corner, weapons raised, they found nothing, just rain, shadows, empty space. Where the hell? A thunderous explosion ripped through the ground beneath them. The blast knocked her flat, dust and shrapnel tore through the air. Ears ringing, vision swimming, Eliza staggered to her feet just as the comms erupted. There in the south, repeat breach in Sector Delta. The feint had been the real attack, they'd anticipated her move. "Fall back," she shouted, "protect the payload." But it was too late. Through the haze, she saw them, ghost cell operatives in matte black gear, moving with mechanical precision. They weren't after the convoy, they were after something beneath it. "Substation," Wisp's voice crackled. "They're targeting the grid junction." And in that moment, Eliza understood. The EMP wasn't meant for the palace or parliament or the hospital, it was meant for the city itself. The firefight was chaos. Bullets tore through corrugated steel, grenades screamed in the distance. Eliza moved like a shadow, her rifle barking in tight, controlled bursts, but for every enemy they dropped, another slipped into the maze below the substation. "Wisp, I need a map." "Sending now, but you won't like it. The junction's deep, 2 levels down." "How long have they planned it?" "5 minutes, maybe less." She swore under her breath and sprinted forward, sliding down a maintenance shaft into the belly of the grid. The air was damp and electric, humming with the pulse of thousands of volts. And somewhere in that maze of steel and cable, Ghost Cell was arming their weapon. Her boots splashed through ankle-deep water, sparks danced along exposed wires, ahead voices echoed, sharp, foreign, focused. 3 minutes, someone shouted. Eliza pressed herself against a column, forcing her breath to steady. There were 4 of them, 2 planting charges, 1 calibrating the warhead and 1 standing guard. Too many for a frontal assault, too little time for caution. She waited for the guard to turn, then moved. The first man dropped silently, a blade to the throat. The second whirled too late, 2 rounds to the chest dropped him. The third lunged with a shout, wrench in hand. They crashed into a steel railing, grappling. Sparks exploded as a live wire snapped nearby. "Eliza's status," Ash's voice barked in her ear. "Busy." She twisted, driving her knee into the man's gut. He stumbled back straight into the humming conduit. There was a blinding flash, then silence. 1 left. The last man, the one at the warhead, was gone. Panic surged, she scanned the chamber and then saw it. A faint trail of wet bootprints leading deeper into the junction tunnels. "He's moving with the device," she shouted, tearing after him. The tunnels twisted endlessly, a labyrinth of flickering lights and dripping pipes. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but she didn't stop, couldn't. This wasn't just a mission anymore, this was personal. She caught sight of him near a maintenance hatch, struggling under the weight of the warhead. "Drop it," she yelled. He spun, pistol raised. A shot cracked past her ear. Another slammed into the wall beside her. She dove behind a pillar, returning fire in short, vicious bursts. 1 hit, then another. The man fell, the warhead clattering to the floor. For a long, breathless moment, the only sound was the hiss of steam and the hammering of her heartbeat. "Device secured," she panted into her comm. "Repeat, device secured." Cheers erupted over the channel, but Eliza didn't smile. Because even as she stared at the inert cylinder on the floor, something felt wrong. Too easy. Too sloppy. Too obvious. Back at headquarters, engineers confirmed her suspicion. The warhead was a decoy. It was real, functional but crude, a distraction. The real payload was still out there. "They wanted you to find it," Bryce said grimly. "They wanted you focused here." Eliza's hands curled into fists. "Then where's the real one?" No one had an answer. But then Wisp, bleary-eyed and half delirious from 20 hours without sleep, stumbled into the briefing room. I think I know, he said, dropping a folder onto the table. Satellite images, shipment manifests. A single truck, unmarked, departing a warehouse on the outskirts of the city 2 hours before the ambush. Destination St. Aldwyn's Hospital. The blood drained from Eliza's face. The hospital, the one she'd dismissed as unlikely, the one filled with over 3,000 civilians, patients, staff, children. It had never been about the crown or parliament or humiliation. It had always been about terror. We have 8 hours, Bryce said quietly, after that. He didn't finish, he didn't need to. They mobilized everything, tactical units, bomb squads, medical evacuation teams, but even with every resource at their disposal, it was a race they were losing. The truck had vanished into the sprawl of the city, no license plate hits, no CCTV trail, no digital footprint. It was like it had evaporated. Until Ash approached her hours later, a grim look on his face. There's one more laid, he said, Kirill. Her jaw tightened. Where? An informant says he's meeting a contact at the old clock tower near the hospital, midnight. It was a trap, she knew at the moment she heard it, but she also knew it was their only shot. The night was bitterly cold. Fog rolled through the empty streets like smoke. The clock tower loomed ahead, its hands frozen at 11:58, a monument to a time that had long since stopped. Eliza moved alone this time. No team, no backup, just a pistol, a calm link in the ghosts that walked with her. He was waiting for her. Kirill, standing beneath the broken clock face, hands tucked casually into his coat pockets, as if they were meeting for coffee instead of war. Captain Hart, he said, his accent still sharp and familiar, I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. You wanted me here, she said, I'm here. He smiled faintly, you always were predictable. And you always were a coward. His eyes hardened, you should thank me, I could have ended this days ago, but I wanted you to see it, to feel it. Feel what? The weight of inevitability. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Where's the truck, Kirill? He tilted his head. You think I'd tell you? You're not leaving here alive. Maybe not, but neither are they. She stepped forward, gun steady. Tell me where it is. He just smiled. It's too late. Her heart skipped. What? Check the time. She glanced up. The clock's frozen hands glowed faintly in the moonlight. 11:59. And then beneath the distant hum of the city, she heard it, a low, pulsing whine. The sound of a signal activating. The countdown had begun. Why was her hand shaking when it had never failed her before? The rain was falling harder now, a cold, steady drum against the glass dome above the palace courtyard. From her post along the outer perimeter, Captain Alara Keene could see the crowd pressing closer against the iron gates, their umbrellas forming a dark, restless sea. Somewhere beneath them, a protest chant was building low, rhythmic, growing louder. But that wasn't what made her chest tighten tonight. It was the face she'd seen just seconds ago, a familiar one buried in the throng. It couldn't be. It shouldn't be. She swallowed hard and shifted her stance, the polished black of her uniform boots glistening under the wet light. The crowd's noise pressed against her senses, but her mind was trapped in a loop, replaying that glimpse, a woman's profile, eyes like her mother, the same silver streak in her hair. She hadn't seen her in 15 years, and yet here of all nights, of all missions, that ghost had surfaced. Alpha 3 report, came a voice through her comm. Alara blinked and refocused. Perimeter secure, she answered, voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Crowd density at Gate 4 increasing by 6%, no breach indicators. Copy, eyes open. As if they ever were. But there was something else tonight, something that felt wrong beneath the ordinary. She scanned the line again. Most faces were predictable, tourists craning necks for a glimpse of the royal balcony, protesters holding placards dampened by rain, journalists with long lenses and longer agendas. And yet there it was again. The same woman, now closer, watching her, not the palace. Alara's heartbeat drummed louder than the rain. No focus, this was not the time to let the past in. But the past had a way of walking through barriers when you least expected it. The briefing hours earlier had been routine on the surface. The Queen's Guard, the most elite protective detail in the realm, was to manage crowd control during a state ceremony marking 70 years of constitutional reign. Threat level moderate, political climate tense but manageable. But beneath the neat bullet points, the mission had teeth. Anonymous chatter had been picked up on dark networks, whispers of a disruption, a possible attempt to humiliate the monarchy live on broadcast. Nothing specific, nothing actionable, and yet the unease in the room had been palpable. Any questions? Asked Commander Rhodes, eyes sweeping the table. Alara had almost spoken then. Almost mentioned the odd data spike she'd flagged in the surveillance feed, the same unknown encrypted signal that had appeared 3 nights in a row, originating near the same square. but the others had already dismissed it as noise, and besides, Rhodes hated speculation. Now, standing in the rain hours later, she regretted her silence. Gate 4, maintain visual, suspect in black coat approaching your sector. The call snapped her back. Alara's eyes locked on the movement, a figure slipping through the edge of the crowd, hands buried deep in pockets. Male, mid-30s, moving with deliberate calm, too calm, the subtle, predatory kind of calm she'd been trained to spot. Her finger brushed the calm toggle. I see him, adjusting position. She shifted 2 paces forward, posture tightening, breath slowing. The world shrank to a tunnel, crowd noise fading, rain a distant hiss. It was just her and the man now, separated by a few meters and a thin line of iron. He stopped, lifted his eyes, and smiled. Not a threat smile, a knowing one. And in that instant, Alara realized he wasn't here to breach the gate. He was bait. Alpha 3, Rhodes' voice came sharp. We have movement on the west perimeter, possible secondary. The rest of the transmission was drowned in a sudden explosion of sound, not from a bomb, but from the crowd. A coordinated surge pushing forward as if on cue, bodies slammed against the gate, screams pierced the air. The man in black vanished into the chaos like smoke. Crowd breach attempt, all units lockdown protocol, Alara shouted, but even as the words left her lips, she knew it wasn't the real play. This was a distraction. And distractions always meant one thing: something bigger was unfolding elsewhere. 30 meters away, beneath the gilded arches of the main courtyard, a procession had begun, the queen herself stepping out under a canopy of royal blue, flanked by ceremonial guards. Cameras clicked, the anthem rose, and in that moment Alara's stomach twisted. No, it was too perfect, too exposed. Her eyes darted across rooftops, windows, any elevated angle. Years of sniper training had burned the patterns into her instincts, and there, just barely visible against the storm-dark sky, a glint, a reflection, a scope. Command, this is Alpha 3. Possible overwatch northwest sector, 5th window from the top. Copy Alpha 3, units en route. But they wouldn't be fast enough. She knew it. She felt it. Her boots were already moving before the thought completed, cutting across the slick stone, weaving through the tightening ring of guards. Her breath tore at her lungs as she climbed the staircase 2 at a time, each second hammering against her ribs. By the time she reached the landing, the shot hadn't come yet, but it would. And when it did, it would be too late. The door ahead was locked, of course it was. She drew her sidearm and fired once. The lock exploded. Inside, the hallway stretched long and empty. Wind hissed through a broken pane, and at the end of that corridor, crouched low and focused, was the shooter. He wasn't aiming at the queen. He was aiming at someone beside her. And Alara's heart dropped. Commander Rhodes. She didn't think, she didn't breathe, she moved. The shot rang out just as she tackled the shooter from behind. The rifle went wide, slug embedding harmlessly into the marble. They crashed to the floor, his elbow smashing into her jaw, her knee slamming into his ribs. He was trained, fast, efficient, but rage was faster. Who sent you? She hissed, forcing his wrist against the ground until the bone popped. He only smiled through the pain. You don't get it, do you? Then, before she could react, he bit down hard on a small black capsule in his mouth. His body went limp in seconds. Poison. Alara stared down at him, chest heaving, rainwater dripping from her hair into her eyes. Another ghost. Another question left unanswered. Back on the ground, the situation was stabilizing. The surge had been contained, no breach occurred, and the queen was escorted back inside unharmed. But Rhodes wasn't looking at the press or the panicked crowd. He was looking at her. What the hell happened up there? He demanded when they were finally alone. Shooter professional took the easy way out, she answered. And the crowd push. Diversion. Rhodes rubbed a hand over his face, the weight of 100 political consequences settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just a protest, this was coordinated. I know. Do we have anything? Alara hesitated, only one thing: he wasn't aiming for the queen. The silence that followed was heavier than any alarm. Rhodes stared at her, eyes narrowing. Then who? Alara met his gaze. You. That night when the rain had stopped and the courtyard was empty, Alara stood alone at her post. The face from the crowd, the one that had haunted her, lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Maybe it hadn't been her mother, maybe it had. Either way, it reminded her of something she'd spent years trying to forget, that sometimes the enemy wasn't on the other side of the fence. Sometimes they were inside the walls, sometimes they were people you swore to protect. A light drizzle began to fall again, soft and cold. Alara tilted her head back and let it wash over her face. Tomorrow would bring questions, investigations, maybe even blame. But tonight there was only silence and the knowledge that the game had changed. And deep in her gut she knew this was just the opening move. Why did the message appear on her encrypted device when no one should have known that channel existed? It was 2 hours past midnight, and the palace was wrapped in that uneasy kind of silence, the one that doesn't comfort but listens. Captain Alara Keen sat alone in the dim operations room, boots planted on the cold floor, eyes locked on the flickering blue screen before her. A new message had arrived through a route so deeply buried in classified protocols that not even her commander should have been able to access it. You're chasing the wrong threat. The real danger walks beside you. No sender, no traceable signature, no encryption key she recognized. And yet something about the syntax, the phrasing, it was familiar, intimately so. Her hands curled into fists before she even realized they were trembling. Still awake, a voice called from the doorway. Alara minimized the screen as Commander Rhodes stepped in, his uniform jacket slung over his shoulder, fatigue carved deep into his face. He looked older tonight, or maybe it was just the weight of knowing someone had tried to end his life hours ago. Couldn't sleep, she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He eyed her, then the terminal. Neither could I. Intel's running every database we have, but so far the shooter's ghosting us. No prints, no ID, no network chatter. Whoever's behind this, they're good. Too good, Alara murmured. Rhodes moved closer, leaning against the edge of the table. You saved my life today. That's the only reason I'm still standing here, but I need you to do something harder now. She raised an eyebrow, harder than tackling an assassin through a window. He didn't smile. I need you to trust me. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. I do. Then trust me when I say this isn't over, and when the time comes, you're going to have to make a choice, one that might not make sense until it's too late. Before she could ask what he meant, Rhodes turned and left, his footsteps fading into the empty corridor. Alara stared at the closed door long after he was gone, that cryptic message burning in the back of her mind. The real danger walks beside you. The debriefing the next morning was worse than she'd expected. Officials from intelligence, royal security, and internal affairs crowded the operations chamber, their questions sharp and endless. Why hadn't the encrypted signal been flagged earlier? Why hadn't she reported the unknown contact she'd spotted in the crowd? And why, of all things, had the shooter aimed for Rhodes instead of the Queen? Maybe it was a power play, suggested one analyst, tapping his pen against a tablet. Eliminate the commander, destabilize the unit, strike again later. Or another countered, it's someone inside the guard, someone who knew Rhodes would be there, knew the angle, knew the timing. The room fell silent at that. Alara felt every pair of eyes shift subtly but unmistakably in her direction. I've served this unit for 12 years, she said coldly. If anyone thinks I'm capable of betrayal, they can say it to my face. No one did, but the silence was louder than accusations. Later that afternoon, she stood by the palace gates again, watching the cleanup crews dismantle barriers and sweep away debris from the protest. The square looked ordinary now, as if the chaos of yesterday had never happened. But Alara knew better. The air still hummed with something unfinished. She checked her watch, 15:07. Her contact was late. A man in civilian clothes approached, tall and lean, carrying a small case under one arm. MI5 liaison. He didn't introduce himself, they never did. Instead, he handed her a folder sealed with a red strip. Preliminary analysis, he said. You'll want to see page 7. She flipped it open. A photograph stared back, grainy surveillance stills from the night before. The shooter captured from 3 different angles, but it wasn't his face that froze her blood. It was the man standing 3 feet behind him, unarmed, casual, blending into the chaos. The same man from the protest line, the one who smiled. Her breath caught. You have an ID. Working on it. Facial match is incomplete, but we're 90% certain he's ex-military. Special Reconnaissance Regiment, discharged 6 years ago, vanished off-grid. Name. The agent hesitated. Rowan Vale. The world tilted. The name hit her like a punch to the chest. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in over a decade. Rowan Vale. The man who had once been her mentor, her closest friend in the unit, the man who had saved her life in Kandahar, and the man who had disappeared without a word after the mission that broke her career. And now he was back. But why, and why target Rhodes? She closed the folder, jaw tightening. The message on her terminal suddenly felt less like a threat and more like a warning. The real danger walks beside you. Could it be Rhodes? Could it be someone else? Or was Rowan warning her about something even deeper? That night she returned to her flat in Westminster, a sparse, minimalist space that smelled faintly of gun oil and rain. Sleep was impossible, so she poured herself a cup of black coffee and stared at the skyline beyond the window. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just one line, Southbank Bridge 300, come alone. Her pulse quickened. It was either a trap or a confession. Either way, she was going. The bridge was nearly empty at that hour, the Thames glistening under pale moonlight, a slow current winding through the heart of the city. Alara arrived 10 minutes early, scanning rooftops, lampposts, every shadowed alley. Nothing, just silence and the smell of damp stone. Then a voice, soft and familiar, came from behind her. I was wondering if you'd remember the old protocols. She turned. Rowan stepped out from the darkness, his face older, rougher, but unmistakable, the same calculating calm in his eyes, the same scar across his left temple, a scar he'd earned saving her life. Why are you here? She demanded, hand hovering near her holster. Because you're chasing ghosts, he replied, and because you need to stop. Stop what? Stop trusting the wrong man. The wind carried the words between them like a blade. You're talking about Rhodes, she said. I'm talking about the man who ordered a false intel drop in Kabul, the one who left a local informant and 4 of our own to die so he could salvage a diplomatic photo op. Rowan's jaw clenched, and the one who covered it up by blaming you. Eliza's heart froze. What did you just say? You were never meant to be the fall girl, but Rhodes made sure of it, and now he's cleaning house. The shooter wasn't there for the Queen, he was there to finish unfinished business. Her breath came shallow now. You have proof. Rowan stepped closer, pulling a small data chip from his coat, enough to burn him to the ground, but it's useless without someone on the inside, someone like you. She stared at the chip, then back at Rowan. Memories of that disastrous mission flooded her mind, the one that had left civilians dead, intelligence compromised, and her reputation in ruins. She'd always believed it was her fault, her hesitation, her decision. But what if it was? What do you want from me? She whispered. Help me expose him, Rowan said, or walk away and let him do to someone else what he did to you. The clock struck 3:30 by the time Alara returned to her flat, the chip burning a hole in her pocket. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window, a soldier who'd built her entire life on duty, loyalty, and command. And now that foundation was cracking. If Rowan was telling the truth, then everything, her demotion, her exile from field command, even the guilt she'd carried, had been built on a lie. But if he was lying, she thought of Rhodes' words in the operations room. You're going to have to make a choice, one that might not make sense until it's too late. Was he warning her or manipulating her? For the first time in years, Alara didn't know who to trust, and the uncertainty clawed at her like a wound. At dawn, the first light broke over London, pale gold spilling across the palace spires. The city was waking, but Alara wasn't. She was still at the window, coffee gone cold, the date a chip turning over and over in her hand. Somewhere in the distance, a clock tower struck 6. She had 12 hours before the next state event, 12 hours before Rhodes would be back in public view, 12 hours to decide whether she was going to betray the man who trusted her or protect a system that might have betrayed her. Either choice would destroy something. Either choice would set the course for everything that came next. And as the rain returned, soft against the glass, Alara whispered the question she'd been too afraid to ask until now. What if the real threat is me? Why was the city so quiet when it should have been roaring awake? The morning after Rowan's warning felt unnatural, too still, too deliberate. Even the usual rhythm of London traffic seemed to move with a strange, hesitant pulse, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Captain Alara Keene hadn't slept, not a second. The chip he'd given her sat on the table beside a cooling cup of tea, an unspoken question pressing against the edges of her mind. Was it the truth, or the most dangerous lie she'd ever been handed? The sky outside her window was a pale ashen gray, a color she knew all too well from mornings after missions gone wrong. And maybe that was fitting, because no matter what she chose today, something was going to go wrong. She reached for the chip, just touching it made her pulse spike. It was small, lightweight, but its weight was measured in far more than grams. It was measured in lives, reputations, maybe even the monarchy itself. She slid it into the reader. The screen blinked to life. Dozens of files loaded one after another, mission reports, encrypted orders, field logs, and something else. Something worse, intercepted communications. They were timestamped, signed, authenticated, and all of them pointed to one name. Commander Nathaniel Rhodes. Orders to delay reinforcements in Kabul. Instructions to falsify civilian casualty reports. An internal memo shifting operational blame directly onto Alara's shoulders. She stared at the words on the screen, each one cutting deeper than the last. She remembered that mission, the sounds, the screaming, the gunfire. She remembered holding a dying interpreter in her arms while a drone feed went dark. And she remembered the tribunal that followed, failure of judgment, breakdown of protocol, operational incompetence, words that had nearly ended her career, words that Rhodes had fed them. Her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. It had all been a lie. The palace was already preparing for the afternoon ceremony, a celebration meant to restore public confidence after the attempted attack. Dignitaries were arriving from across Europe. Cameras were being mounted along rooftops and railings. And in the middle of it all, Commander Rhodes was everywhere shaking hands, giving orders, the picture of calm leadership. Alara watched him from a distance, every muscle in her body screaming at her to confront him. But confrontation without proof was suicide, and proof without a plan was meaningless. Captain Keene, a voice called from behind. She turned to see Lieutenant Marlowe, young, eager, loyal to a fault. He saluted, then hesitated when he noticed the tension in her eyes. Commander wants you in the control room. Final security brief before the ceremony. On my way, she replied, slipping the data chip into the inside pocket of her jacket. The control room was a hive of activity. Maps and live feeds covered the walls, operators relaying updates from every sector of the city. Alara took her place near the rear, blending into the line of officers. Rhodes was at the center, leaning over a digital table displaying the event's security perimeter. Crowd management teams are in position. Surveillance teams report no anomalies. Airspace remains restricted within a 5-kilometer radius. His voice was steady, commanding. It always had been. That was part of his power, the way he made people feel safe even when he was the reason they were. Captain Keene, Rhodes said suddenly, eyes locking with hers. You'll be overseeing the Northwest Corridor today, VIP ingress route. If there's trouble, I want you there first. Her jaw tightened, understood. He held her gaze for a moment too long, like he was trying to read something beneath the surface. Then he nodded and moved on. But Alara couldn't shake the thought that he knew, that somehow he already suspected she'd spoken to Rowan, that he was testing her. Hours passed in a blur of checks and protocols. By noon, the palace grounds were a fortress. Barricades, scanners, rooftop overwatch, every layer of security imaginable. And yet, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that it was all wrong. Because this wasn't about protecting the Queen anymore. This was about exposing a man who had betrayed everything she believed in. Final comms check, Marlowe's voice came through her earpiece. Ingress convoy ETA 20 minutes. Copy, she replied. Her voice was steady, but her heart was a battlefield. Rowan was waiting where he said he would be, a small cafe across from the northwest gate. She spotted him easily, disguised under a hood, pretending to scroll through a phone. She crossed the street casually, never breaking stride, and sat across from him. You saw it, he said quietly. I saw it. And now you know. Alara didn't answer. She just stared at the chip still clutched in her gloved hand. You can't let this man keep climbing, Rowan continued. He's already cost lives, next time it'll be worse. You don't know what exposing him will do, she said, voice trembling. It won't just be Rhodes, it'll be the Guard, the monarchy, everything we've sworn to protect. And what happens if you do? What happens when the system you protect starts killing the people it's meant to serve? His words were sharp, cutting through the noise in her head, but the noise didn't stop, it never did. Give me one reason, she whispered, one reason why I should trust you after you disappeared. Rowan looked at her, then really looked at her. Because I never stopped watching your back, even when no one else did. The words landed heavier than she expected, and for the first time she believed him. 1432. Convoy inbound. The Queen's motorcade rolled through the gates, escorted by armored vehicles and motorcycle outriders. The ceremony would begin in less than 15 minutes. Alara stood at her post, every sense alive. And then her comm crackled. Alpha 3, we've got a comms anomaly. Northwest uplink interference, origin unknown. Her pulse spiked, soars. Could be nothing, could be a jammer. Could be cover for another hit, she muttered, already moving. She swept the corridor, rooftops, alleys, parked cars, nothing, but the interference wasn't random, it was targeted, and that meant someone was trying to blind them. Command, this is Alpha 3, she said, voice clipped. I'm initiating sweep protocol. Negative, Rhodes replied instantly. Stay at your post, that's an order. Her boots stopped mid-step. Stay, or move. Obey, or act. It was the choice she'd been dreading all day, and she knew deep down that obeying might mean disaster. I'm not leaving this blind spot unchecked, she said, cutting the channel before he could respond. The signal led her to an old service building just outside the northwest gate. Its door was ajar, too easy, too deliberate. She drew her sidearm and entered, heart hammering. The room was empty except for a single device mounted on the wall, a signal disruptor, basic, crude, but effective. And wired with C4. Her breath caught. Command, we've got. The explosion tore through the air before she could finish. The blast wasn't massive, just enough to shatter windows, set off alarms, and plunge the security network into chaos. Detonation near Northwest Corridor, repeat detonation. The radio erupted with panic chatter. Ilara stumbled to her feet, ears ringing, blood trickling from a cut on her temple, and then she heard another sound cutting through the noise, the low hum of an approaching vehicle. Not part of the convoy. Not on any schedule. Her eyes widened. It was a decoy. The black SUV smashed through a side gate, scattering guards as it tore toward the ceremonial plaza. Armed men poured out before it even stopped, 5, maybe 6, moving with coordinated precision. Hostile contact, Ilara shouted. We have armed intrusion northwest vector. Gunfire erupted, guards scrambled for cover, panic rippled through the crowd. Ilara ducked behind a pillar, returning fire, her training taking over. 2 hostiles went down, a third pressed forward, spraying rounds toward the motorcade. And in the chaos, she saw him. Rowan. He was moving through the smoke, not shooting, not fighting, heading straight for Rhodes. Time slowed, the realization slammed into her with terrifying clarity. Rowan wasn't here to help her expose Rhodes, he was here to end him. Rowan, stand down, she screamed into the chaos. He didn't even look back. Her finger tightened on the trigger and froze. This was the man who had once saved her life, the man who had risked everything to give her the truth, but now he was about to commit an act that would brand them both as traitors. If she let him pull the trigger, Rhodes' crimes might die with him. If she stopped him, the truth might die instead. Her heart was a storm, duty and justice clashed inside her like fire and steel. And as Rowan raised his weapon and took aim at the man who had betrayed them both, Ilara's choice crystallized. It wasn't about loyalty. It wasn't about revenge. It was about who she was. And in that instant, with the crowd screaming, the air thick with smoke and gunfire, and the weight of 2 impossible futures hanging in the balance, Captain Ilara Keene made her decision. The shot echoed through the plaza. Only one. The man in Rowan's sights stumbled backward untouched, and Rowan himself fell to his knees, blood blooming across his shoulder. Ilara lowered her weapon, breath trembling. Don't make me do this again, she whispered. Rowan's eyes met hers, a mixture of betrayal and understanding in them. You still don't see it. Then he collapsed unconscious as security forces swarmed the area. The attackers were neutralized within minutes, the Queen was safe, the ceremony was cancelled, and Rhodes, shaken but alive, was already spinning the narrative before the smoke had even cleared. But Ilara stood apart from it all, her gun still warm in her hand, her heart still breaking in her chest. She had stopped a man from becoming a killer. She had protected the system she'd sworn to defend. But as medics carried Rowan's limp body past her, she couldn't shake the question clawing at her soul. Had she just saved the wrong man? Why was the world suddenly so loud, yet she could hear nothing but her own heartbeat? The aftermath of the Northwest Corridor incident left the palace grounds a fractured battlefield. Sirens wailed, security personnel barked commands, and the press swarmed in waves, desperate for images they weren't supposed to get. Captain Ilara Keene moved like a shadow, slipping between the chaos, her mind replaying every second of the previous night. Rowan Vale had survived barely. Medics had stabilized him, but he was unconscious, a quiet storm of blood and bruises tucked away in a secure wing of a hospital she had personally vetted. And she knew with a weight that pressed against her chest that the moment he woke, the truth would come or explode. But first, she had to survive her own demons. The briefing room was empty except for the faint hum of monitors cycling through footage from the previous night. Rhodes' absence was noticeable, though not unexpected. He had retreated to craft the narrative he would feed to the public, to spin the attack and to cement his control over the unit. Ilara lingered near the table, glancing at the data chip again, the files it contained blinking up at her like a countdown she couldn't stop. She wasn't sure what scared her more, Rowan's motives, Rhodes' betrayal, or the knowledge that she had just placed herself in a position where neither allegiance nor duty could protect her from the consequences. Her calm crackled, wisp. Captain, we've traced a communication trail. Nothing major, just anomalies. Might be a decoy, might be linked to last night. You should see this. Ilara grabbed the tablet and scanned the lines of code, her fingers flying over the glass. The anomalies pointed to a network she hadn't seen before, one designed for absolute deniability. And yet, through pattern recognition and deep decryption, one name emerged repeatedly. Rhodes. Her stomach sank. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had manipulated every layer of the operation, every officer, every protocol. He had constructed a web so intricate that anyone who tried to pull it apart without insider knowledge would become ensnared themselves. Ilara clenched her jaw. She had followed orders blindly for years, trusted a system that wasn't designed to protect the innocent. And now, at 31 years old, she realized she had become the instrument of her own disillusionment. By noon, Rowan was awake. Ilara had insisted on being present more for her own sanity than his care. The room was silent except for the mechanical beep of the heart monitor and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Rowan's eyes flickered open, revealing the storm within. He stared at her, assessing, weighing. "You stopped me," he said finally, voice hoarse. "I did," she replied, tone tight, "because even if Rhodes is corrupt, it's not my place to decide who lives or dies." His gaze softened, then sharpened. "You always were the moral compass, even when everyone else was blind." Alara's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel vindicated. But the weight of the chip in her pocket reminded her that vindication came with a price she wasn't sure she could pay. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Rowan paused, wincing slightly. "Now we expose him, but carefully, he won't go quietly, and he has more influence than you know." Her stomach nodded. Influence, power, and reach. It was all she'd ever fought against in her career, and yet the thought of doing nothing was intolerable. "I'll help," she said finally, "but we do it my way." They spent the next several hours combing through the data chip. Every memo, every intercepted communication, every false report, it was all there, meticulously catalogued. Each revelation chipped away at her perception of Rhodes, layer by layer, until the man she had once trusted was unmasked as something unrecognizable. She felt both fury and sorrow, fury for the betrayal, sorrow for the years she had wasted believing in someone who had never been worthy. By the time the sun had dipped low over the Thames, a plan had formed. They would leak evidence to oversight committees and intelligence branches outside of Rhodes' direct control. The goal was surgical exposure, enough to end his power but contained to prevent collateral damage to the Guard or the monarchy. And yet Alara knew the hardest part wasn't in planning the operation. It was in executing it, because the man she had once followed with blind loyalty would recognize her moves, anticipate her actions, and counter every step. Night fell, fog crept over London like a restless spirit. Alara moved through shadows, every step calculated, every breath measured. The data chip was encrypted and copied. Rowan had hidden one set in his bag, another set she carried under her coat. They reached a secure rendezvous point, a nondescript warehouse near the river, chosen for anonymity. Inside, a small team of trusted contacts waited, specialists in digital forensics, secure communication, and legal affairs. Each face carried a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and exhaustion. They had been briefed in fragments, trust balanced on razor-thin lines. Alara stepped forward, laying the chip on the table. "Everything you see here is verifiable, all evidence of falsification, cover-ups, and direct orders to misrepresent operations. You have a responsibility to act legally and ethically, and I trust you will." Murmurs of acknowledgement circled the room. Rowan stood beside her, silent but vigilant, watching every movement. And in that room, Alara felt the weight of the past months compress into a single moment. A choice had been made. She would expose Rhodes, but she knew, as the city slept unaware above them, that doing the right thing never came without sacrifice. By dawn, the operation was in motion. Data had been securely transmitted to oversight authorities. Precautionary measures were taken to prevent leaks that could harm innocent personnel. The palace, the guard, and the monarchy were shielded from immediate fallout. But the personal cost was immediate. Rhodes had noticed the anomaly. He had traced part of the movement, and somewhere his awareness had shifted from control to suspicion, from arrogance to calculated anger. Alara sat alone on a rooftop overlooking the river. The city beneath was awakening, a soft, golden haze spilling across the skyline. Smoke from the previous night's chaos still lingered faintly in the air, a reminder that the world she protected was fragile. Rowan joined her silently, leaning against the railing. "You think he'll come after us?" "Eventually," she admitted. "He's cornered, and cornered predators are the most dangerous." He nodded, gazing at the horizon. "Then we need to be ready." She looked at him, and for the first time she allowed herself to acknowledge something she had buried for years: relief, pride, and the faintest flicker of hope. They had survived the night, they had preserved truth, and they had each other. But Alara knew, as every operative learns, that survival wasn't about escaping danger. It was about enduring it. The city stretched below them, quiet, unaware of the storm that had passed, and in that quiet she found a momentary peace. Sometimes, she realized, justice isn't loud. Sometimes it isn't even recognized. Sometimes it simply acts. Why did the early morning fog feel heavier than usual, pressing against her chest like a warning? Captain Alara Keene stood on the parapet of the palace's west wing, watching London stir beneath a pale, hesitant sun. It was quiet now, deceptively quiet, the calm after weeks of chaos, threats, and moral reckonings. The city seemed unaware that its safety had depended on choices made in shadows, in whispers, and in moments of pure instinct. Her hand rested on the railing, fingers brushing the smooth stone as if seeking grounding. She wasn't just tired, she was raw, stripped of certainty. The past days had blurred into one long test of loyalty, courage, and conscience. And now the final act was approaching. Rhodes would make his move, whether she was ready or not. By mid-morning, the palace was bristling with tension. Security had been increased, overt and covert alike, while oversight teams quietly moved through corridors, reviewing data Alara had transmitted. Rhodes was still officially in command, but every subtle glance, every faintly clipped command betrayed the knowledge that someone had outmaneuvered him. Alara moved like a shadow, checking angles, reviewing routes, and ensuring that the guard, her colleagues, her family in arms were safe. She knew their loyalty was fractured but not broken. Some would follow her lead, others would follow orders blindly. The line between duty and morality had never been more blurred. She paused at the entrance to the main hall, eyes scanning the polished marble floors. The ceremony that had been planned weeks ago would now be symbolic of survival, resilience, and vigilance. Cameras rolled, reporters murmured. The queen herself walked among the guards, composed yet guarded, aware of the undercurrents that no one else could see. And there at the edge of the hall Rhodes stood, waiting, calculating, watching her. Her stomach twisted. The man she had once trusted, the one who had betrayed everything, was now vulnerable yet far from defeated. Alara's finger twitched near her sidearm, but she didn't draw. This confrontation wasn't about gunfire, it was about truth. Rowan appeared quietly beside her, still healing but resolute. "It's time," he whispered. "He'll make his move. Are you ready?" Alara drew a slow breath, ready to face him, ready to face the consequences, but not with a gun. Together they entered the hall, Rhodes' gaze fixed on her immediately, a subtle shift in his posture betraying his recognition. He spoke before anyone else. "Captain Keene," he said, voice controlled, calm, "I hear there been some confusion regarding protocol and operational decisions." Her heart pounded, but her face remained impassive. "Commander Rhodes," she replied, voice steady, "there is no confusion. Facts speak for themselves. Evidence has been submitted. Every decision, every manipulation, every falsified report, it's all documented." A flicker of something passed over his face, surprise, anger, recognition, but he masked it quickly. "I see, and the source of this evidence." "Alara Keene," she said simply, "and those who have served with integrity, including Lieutenant Rowan Vale." The room fell silent. Reporters and dignitaries alike held their collective breath, sensing tension but not understanding its gravity. Rhodes' jaw tightened. A bead of sweat traced his temple, invisible to most, but Alara saw it. "You are accusing me," he said, his voice now low, almost threatening, "of betraying every one of you." "No," Alara replied, "I am stating what has already occurred. The truth does not require accusation, it requires acknowledgement." The queen's eyes, sharp and unflinching, followed the exchange. Alara had anticipated scrutiny but not judgment. Yet in those gaze she saw something remarkable, the recognition of courage, the understanding of responsibility, and the quiet moral weight that separated action from inaction. Rhodes faltered, a rare crack in his armor. And then the first ripple of consequence began. Oversight officials moved forward, armed with the evidence she had helped deliver. Security forces subtly shifted, ensuring the situation remained contained. Every step, every gesture choreographed for precision but underpinned by moral clarity. Alara felt a rare sense of calm. It wasn't victory, it wasn't triumph. It was something more profound, justice balanced by restraint, power restrained by conscience. Rowan's hand brushed hers, a quiet, grounding reassurance. No words were exchanged, they didn't need to be. Hours later, the palace corridors were quiet again. Rhodes had been removed from command, escorted under strict supervision, leaving the guard and the monarchy intact. No collateral damage, no unnecessary spectacle. The city, largely unaware, carried on as if nothing had happened. Alara and Rowan stood on the same rooftop she had visited days before, overlooking the Thames. The water reflected the first rays of a late afternoon sun, glittering gold over the ripples. "You did the right thing," Rowan said softly, "even when it was impossible to know the outcome." Alara shook her head. "I don't know if I did the right thing, I just acted. That's all anyone can do sometimes." He nodded, "And sometimes that's enough." She let the wind wash over her face, carrying the faint scent of rain and the city alive below. The storm of the past days was finally behind her, yet she knew that life in the guard, life in service, would never be entirely calm again. The lessons had been harsh, the choices unyielding, but the truth had survived. For a long moment they simply stood silent, the world around them alive, chaotic, yet somehow serene. Then quietly she murmured, almost to herself, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The words lingered in the cool air, carrying across rooftops and alleys, a testament to resilience, courage, and moral clarity. And in that stillness, the quiet aftermath of chaos and revelation, Captain Alara Keene allowed herself to hope, not for safety, not for peace, but for the knowledge that integrity could survive even the darkest of shadows, that choices made with conscience intact could ripple through the world in subtle but lasting ways. London moved on beneath her, oblivious, yet profoundly shaped by the silent strength of a soldier who had acted when it mattered most. And somewhere in the echo of that morning, the lesson lingered: courage is quiet, justice is patient, and sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought within.